Namaste, welcome to everyone. Another episode of Navavimash podcast where we continue to read books on various topics. Today we found a very interesting topic, very interesting book, which is available free of charge. So, so the author has made the book available to everyone, so everybody can read it. Let me just, yeah. So, and let's see if I can make it little bit better. Mm, yeah. Okay. StreamYard is having little. Yeah, this should be good enough. So this is the book. Let me increase. Okay, first of all, let me know if you can see the fonts because we're going to read the book. Okay. So do let me know. Namaskaram, Abhay. So are you able to read the text? So just give me first that. It's a very interesting book. It's an academically published book. Hmm. The writer of the book is Kerry K. Gershaneck. So, so this is actually a companion reading. Let me actually give a bit of context why we are reading this book. So people will who are tuning in for the first time for this specific book. So let me just do that. Okay, now let me again share my screen. Zoom a little bit more. Okay, let me do this. Yeah, I think 250 is required. Okay, now let me go to the smaller fonts so that, yeah, now try to go through, yeah, this is the one. So let me check. Yeah, is it okay now? Or we need to zoom a little bit more? A thumbs up would be nice if you can read this, or let me do a little bit more. It is now 300. It should be visible now. The StreamYard, let me zoom for smaller fonts. Yeah, I think the fonts are actually okay. Fonts would be okay. Fonts will. I think the fonts are okay. This is the normal font, so I think it should be visible. Okay, should be. Let's make it 350. 350 should be fine. Yeah, okay. So we'll start reading the book. So, but before we read the book, let me give you a bit of context why we are reading this book. I'll stop the screen share and add the screen share to show the details why we are reading this. So previously we did three readings of. So we did the readings in our China series, where not the China series specifically, but reading on the reading based on the books by Mr. Vikram Sood, where he talks about the narrative war. So when it comes to narrative war, China has played a very important role in narrative war, and one of its doctrine is to actually, and we talked about this doctrine in our this raw series China episodes. So this is a companion reading to that last episode we did with China. This was the face off between East and the West, where we talked about specifically the political ideology of the Chinese Communist Party and how they plan to conquer the world. So in that context, we are reading this specific book because it actually directly relates to our last reading that we did. So now let me share this tab. So this book is freely available. You can just type the book's name that is there in the chat, and you will be able to get the book free of cost. PDF is available. It is provided by the author himself and the university. So let's now start reading the book. Okay, and what your questions will be there, and it seems like someone with the sage name among the sage. Good. Yeah, Didi, no problem. You can hear. I'll try to read slowly. Okay, let's read the book first. Professor Kerry K. Okay, let me pronounce the name correctly. Gershaneck study on the People's Republic of China, PRC. One important thing that we need to understand that most of people or many people will not know the real name of China. Okay, so you have Republic of China. Okay, that is Taiwan. So when the in 1949 the Chinese Revolution happened in 1949-48. So uh, there was a civil war between the Chinese Communist Party, okay, and the existing political government was there. And so the existing political government in China, which was like a kind of British colony, they fled to Taiwan. So that is the old ruling elite, and they went to Taiwan, and that became Republic of China. The communists who won the war, who won the civil war, and grabbed power in mainland China, they become PRC, People's Republic of China. So when you talk about China, there are actually two official Chinas. One is the PRC, and the other is Republic of China. So when we talk about PRC, we are talking about the current mainland Chinese government, the communist government. Okay, so now we'll start reading the book. Professor Kerry K. Gershaneck study on the People's Republic of China, PRC's political warfare stands as a major contribution to the body of knowledge regarding this existential threat to the United States, its freedom, and its values. This book is written specifically for United States, but we have seen for last 15 to 20 years how China has gained foothold politically, economically into various other countries using the same method that it is using in United States to actually influence its politics, its education, and other related fields. But okay, freedom and its values. He provides a well researched and wide ranging overview of the nature of the PRC threat and the political warfare strategies, doctrines, and operational practices used by the Chinese Communist Party, CCP. Further, Professor uh, Gershaneck offers detailed and illuminating case studies of the PRC political warfare operations designed to undermine Thailand, a US treaty ally, and Taiwan, a close friend. As we mentioned, that although the book primarily focuses on the activities of the political interference via CCP in United States, but it also deals with other countries who are also affected by this. Further, Professor Gershaneck offers detailed and illuminating case studies of the PRC political warfare operations designed to undermine Thailand, a US treaty ally, and Taiwan, a close friend. This book is not merely an academic study. It is also based in great part on Gershaneck's extensive experience working in the field of national intelligence, counterintelligence, international relations, strategic communications, and academia during the course of more than 35 years, at times literally on the front lines combating PRC political PRC political warfare. He witnessed firsthand the United States at its zenith in the political warfare fight as well as its subsequent abandonment of high-level political warfare organizations, education, and operations at the end of Cold War. So Cold War is people will know about it, but we can discuss later what Cold War is. As commander of the U.S. Marine Corps Force, Corps Force Pacific, as commander of the U.S. Marine Corps Force Pacific in the early 2000s, I observed a disturbing trend based in large part on the United States dismantlement of its own political warfare apparatus. So Cold War was they were fighting war not with guns, not with weapons, but with soft power, with political agenda, with education, with science and technology, with corporate warfare, economic warfare. So that would be a called as a Cold War, rather than having fighting with real hard weapons. It was becoming increasingly apparent that American government, business, academics, culture, and other elites were losing the ability to identify and confront PRC political warfare. By the time I assumed duties as U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense, U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific Security Affairs in 2009, America's unwillingness and inability to recognize and challenge Beijing's malign persuasion, intimidation, coercion, infiltration, and subversion was even more evident. Even within the highest levels of the U.S. Department of Defense, with senior leadership focused more on combat operations in Southwest Asia, Southwest Asia than the rapidly emerging threat from China. It was very difficult to shift focus and resources to addressing the PRC. As this book goes to print, United States is engulfed in the coronavirus disease 2019 COVID-19 pandemic and a massive PRC political warfare campaign to rewrite history regarding its role in the epidemic. The circumstances of this pandemic may be unusual, but this is a typical PRC political warfare campaign of cover up, deception, misinformation, coercion, depression, and intimidation. So these are the tactics. So you to remember very carefully these terms. They will come multiple times when we read further. Consequently, there is a rapid awakening in the United States about the nature of the threat from, from the PRC. This makes the publication of this book all the more pertinent and timely. During more than 25 years that I have known Professor Gershaneck, he has demonstrated superior abilities as a strategic planner, researcher, analyst, and operator in the field. He superbly masters both the realm of academic research and theory and the world of street smart operational practice, and he brings his unique perspective and capabilities to this important project. This book is a call to arms as well as a valuable study of of the history and nature of PRC political warfare threat. While the United States has recently begun a more seriously engaged on the political warfare battlefield, much more work and investment of national resources lie ahead. Professor Geshank provides useful strategic, operational, and tactical level recommendations to deter, confront, and defeat PRC political warfare operations, all of which are crucial to development of a coherent, successful national response. Lieutenant General Wallace C. Gregson Jr., USMC retired, U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asia Asian and Pacific Security Affairs 2009 to 11. Preface. Political warfare is not a new phenomenon. Its practice spans thousands of years, and it is not unique to the People's Republic of China, PRC. Very important to note that this is not something new and uniquely happening. This has been going on for thousands of years. Still, the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, is devilishly good at conducting its own particular virulent form of it. Form of it. It means very potent. The PRC version of political warfare poses more than a unique challenge. It presents an existential threat to the United States and its friends and allies. The CCP no longer hides its disdain for concepts such as democracy, rule of law, freedom of speech, human rights, nor does it conceal its intent to create a new world order based on its totalitarian model. Political warfare is a primary tool that the CCP employs to defeat the United States. It is it is the PRC's magical path to victory, to win not so much without struggle, but without having to resort to open kinetic conflict. Kinetic conflict means active warfare where you fight with hard weapons, live weapons, and ammunition. PRC's intent is not a theoretical conjecture. Beijing demonstrates on a daily basis its eagerness and ability to subvert and defeat, or to use CCP parlance, to divide and disintegrate the United States and other foreign nations. This intent and capability is explored in considerable detail in this book, which includes case studies of PRC campaigns to co-opt Thailand, a treaty ally of the United States, and take possession of Taiwan, with which the United States shares a special relationship. The PRC's complex and remarkable successful political warfare campaign against Thailand will surprise many readers, as will the extent and viciousness of its relentless efforts to capture Taiwan. What will be the result of PRC's victory in these campaigns? Thailand risks assuming uh, tributary state tributary state status to Beijing, while Taiwan faces extinction as a sovereign entity. Loss of its hard-fought freedom and brutal repression of its people. Of particular concern is that in the PRC's war to divide and disintegrate us, we are not winning. Victory is not a given, nor at this point even in sight. This is the main reason this book was written. We in the United States must reverse what appears to be inevitable defeat, which requires us to relearn the means to deter, counter, and defeat PRC's daunting political warfare threat. We need to understand this specific book and the political warfare campaign which is going on to okay what is happening right now with more than 125% approximate tariffs imposed by Trump on China. So this book is written a few years ago, where the party in power was Democrats, and we know what kind of relationship they had with China. Now it is understand that whatever the book is written and whatever it is predictions that are going to happen and what are the tactics and how to counter them, we can see exactly what is being done by Donald Trump, the current president of the United States, Donald, uh, Donald Trump, and he is imposing tariffs on China. So part of the book's remedy is being implemented in the economic front as we speak now. So it's very interesting time we were reading this book. This book is talk about the threats and how to mitigate them, and we are seeing in real time. If you follow the news regularly, especially for China and United States, you will see that the remedy is being done in real time, and we can see it happening. So it's a very interesting time we are reading this book. Daunting political warfare threat. But first, we as a nation means United States, we as a nation must be willing and able to recognize that threat. This statement might seem like a blinding flash of the obvious, but the task is significantly harder than it appears. While it took roughly 12 months to research and write this book, it is fair to say that this work is the culmination of more than 35 years of experience and study. As a young Marine Corps counterintelligence officer, I was initiated. I was initiated in PRC. Okay, now this is very important part that we are reading about it. While it took roughly 12 months to research and write this book, it is fair to say that this work is the culmination of more than 35 years of experience and study. As a young Marine Corps counterintelligence officer, I was initiated in PRC malign influence operations during a particularly dismal era of the Cold War. So you can understand when the author, when you start the book, that political warfare is nothing new. Every country, every state power, a power state will do this to actually protect its own interest and to weaken its enemies. This is going on, but it happens in the background where it is not obvious to everybody until you go and search for it. So this political warfare propaganda was happening all the time, but nobody noticed it. So because the author knows about it, so he understands that okay, how the propaganda actually works, how the warfare tactics actually work, and he is narrating it. How actually he came about noticing this. During a particularly dismal era of the Cold War, South Vietnam, just after the fall of South Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos to PRC. So remember that in the Cold War, China attacked Vietnam, although China was defeated and they had to retreat. But China also invaded Cambodia and Laos to PRC backed. So communist guerrillas, PRC backed communist forces. At that time, I studied political warfare as practiced by the PRC and Soviet Union, learning their approaches to espionage, sabotage, and subversion. I then had a golden opportunity to help combat their political warfare and espionage activities in Asia and elsewhere, albeit in a minor supporting role. So these things goes on. Chinese will have their own political warfare machinery and operations, and other countries will have their own. It is important to note that combating political warfare was easier in that era, as most senior US government security and diplomatic officials, as well as American business, industry, and news media leaders, had at least some rudimentary understanding of that hostile threat. We are not so fortunate today. This formative experience, combined with subsequent broader involvement in the fields of intelligence and counterintelligence, strategic communication, international relations, and academia, provided a strong foundation on which to write on this topic. As important as important was serving with the US Information Agency as the office of the Secretary of Defense liaison, and experience acquired during assignments at US Information Service offices abroad. While the path to this book was filled with many inspiring experiences, it sometimes revealed deeply disappointing realities as well. So people who are might be like thinking why we are reading this specific part of it, not both the chapters itself, because uh, most of the audience, I assume, are not familiar with the book or the writer or the pretext and context why the book is written. So it is for the audience and for myself also to actually get the context and the pretext of this book's written, why it was written, and the political scenario, the current political scenario, how it came about it, so that we can, when we read the chapters, we can actually connect the dots much more in a clear manner. Deeply disappointing realities as well. Following is a brief overview of some of the disturbing insights I gained that convinced me that a book on this subject would be of great value. First, the CCP is good at employing political warfare. So, communists in general are very good at uh, subvertive, subvertive activities in propaganda specifically. By contrast, the United States, because CCP or communists are dictators in nature, so they only accept their ideology as the primary ideology, and they do not accept any other ideology or thought process or a process of governance. For a communist, they are the only gods which have the power, which have the right to govern people and states and countries. Now, when you come to democracy, it's a very different thing. So that's why we mentioned the CCP is quite good at employing political warfare because the ideology is built for that specific purpose. By contrast, the United States is not. Yes, we mastered it pretty well during the Cold War, but we then declared victory over the Soviet Union, the end of history. So a lot of people might not be aware that when the Cold War ended and Soviet Union disintegrated, lot of academics told now history has ended. US will be the sole superpower. Capitalism and democracy will reign all over the world. And history, as we know, has ended. So now everything is settled. Historically, everything is settled. Now it will be smooth sailing. That's why the term end of history comes. In fact, we are living in a unipolar, non-threatening world. So this unipolar means US after the Second World War, US was the only superpower, and it had presence in over 100 countries with military bases. It had the financial, the military, political, diplomatic, and soft power. It held all these powers into a single country, and no other country could challenge in any of the power domains which it had acquired after Second World War. So it became a unipolar world. Well, US would say whatever it wants, and people would have to do it because they hold the power on every domain. We were living in a unipolar, non-threatening world. We were told. So that US. So one more thing important, that after Second World War ended, the US Navy, which is the biggest navy in this world, they began to actually police the oceans so that the trade trade between countries with ships traveling thousands of miles to deliver goods and services were became a reality. Before Second World War, so so this whatever we see today, correct? We see your mobile phone, that we have this mobile phone. This mobile phone has hundreds of components, and not all components are built here. They are built in various continents, and they are shipped to one more country for to be assembled in India or in China or in Vietnam or some other countries. So this global trade was only possible because the US Navy took the as US Navy became the guarantor of security of the seas. It used its vast navy to actually patrol the open waters of oceans, and ships could actually travel without being robbed, without being hijacked, and so that this global trade grew. So Whatever you see today as a globalization is an outcome of US Navy playing its role as a policeman of the world, especially in the seas. And that's where we there's a thing called living in a unipolar, non-threatening world where the US military was used to actually promote trade and cooperation between countries rather than threaten people, threaten countries. We were told. Consequently, we shut down our cornerstone political warfare institutions and capabilities and dropped our guard for nearly 3 decades, during which our offensive and defensive political warfare skills uh, okay, atrophied. Despite some effort, despite some effort devoted to combating radical Islam and a nod to Russia, we paid little focus to the greatest threat, the PRC. So when you had correct, the Al Qaeda war happened. So US invaded Afghanistan after the twin towers were attacked by the Al Qaeda and Bin Laden. Second, during the course of these 3 decades, we lost sight of how to prepare our elected officials and policy makers, military and foreign service officers, and business industry, entertainment, commerce, news media, academic leaders for the never-ending struggle that is the nature of hostile political warfare. Lot of people ask, we see in the chats that why the Indian political class, the Indian bureaucracy, the Indian policymakers are not as foresighted in terms of finding what is the who are the enemies of India and where we need to focus. That is because the way they are trained, the way their thought process, the way they are educated, the way they are told what one needs to be done, what they are taught at school, what their training is about. Same thing has happened with also with US. So we can see a similarity that we complain about our bureaucrats not being effective and assertive enough as the world's fifth biggest economy. So we can see a parallel being drawn here. Since the end of Cold War, many American elites rose to lofty positions in these important fields with nothing to inform them of the dangers posed by political warfare or how to combat it. After 1992, political warfare related after 1992, political warfare related courses disappeared from the curriculum of the universities that traditionally produced America's diplomats, elected officials, and military leaders. Consequently, there exists no systematic way to educate emerging national leaders about the political warfare threat and help inoculate them to its strategies and tactics. As evidence, I routinely talk with recent graduates of reputable master's degree programs and US military command and staff colleges. Invariably, the graduates tell me that at these esteemed institutions, they were generally taught that the PRC is our partner, not a threat. So when we see the kind of colonial slave mentality that our India's diplomatic, bureaucratic, and leadership has towards the Western nations, towards the Western countries, you can see where it comes from. The education institutions, how they are taught, how they are trained, what they are taught, makes what is today that we have the bureaucratic class. And we can complain about it, but the way their minds are being shaped, their thoughts are being shaped. So you can't change it overnight. They learned they learned a little about soft. They learned a little about soft and hard power, but they were taught nothing about political warfare. One consequence I have observed firsthand is that many US government officials and bureaucrats cannot recognize political warfare at all. For many who at least acknowledge it exists, it is too complex or at most a mere niche issue. As I was told by a senior US official at a major American mission in Asia who was assigned to assist my research in 2018. Moreover, in Moreover, in stereotypical bureaucratic style, many in government and the private sector see political warfare waged by hostile countries against the United States as important, but not my job. This is very important, not my job. It is something which is important, but I am not taught. I don't know how to do all these things. I don't understand. So it's not my job to do. Somebody else will do it for me. Uh, Not my job. A kind of a Babu Dome cliche. In his superb book, Stealth War: How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept, former senior U.S. National Security Council NSC official S. Robert S. Spalding III details his painful experience dealing with the the not my job syndrome as he tried to enlist the private sector and government officials to counter the PRC's malign influence. At the government and institutional levels, the United States has lost its ability to recognize the political warfare threat, educate its elites and officials about it, prioritize, prioritize resources to engage it, and plan and conduct operations to deter, counter, and defeat it. In other words, we have created the perfect prescription for defeat on the battlefield information battlefield. Third, sometimes our failure to recognize and confront PRC political warfare is through simple ignorance and ineptitude, but often it is willful, resulting from co-option, coercion, and bribery. Understand, every individual is vulnerable, so co-option, coercion, and bribery is the favorite methods to actually get what you need to be done. Bribery, in indoctrination, intimidation, or psychological manipulation. Grant Newsham Grant Newsham, a noted security analyst with extensive political warfare expertise, explains how the CCP sets the conditions for conscious decisions to aid, enable, apologize, and or cover for its totalitarian regime. Read very carefully. Grant Grant Newsham, a noted security analyst with extensive political warfare expertise, explains how the CCP sets out the conditions for conscious decisions to aid, enable, apologize when something goes wrong. They will say, "Okay, we are sorry for this," and or to cover for its totalitarian regime, like we have seen in COVID-19. There were lockdowns where people were forced to be locked down. They were forced to stay indoors, and if they protested, they wanted to come out. Their doors were locked and welded so that they could not come out even they wanted. So these kinds of totalitarian activities, they know how to cover them up as to protect greater society, that the disease will not spread. So they will use all this cover up misinformation, information agendas to give a perception that these tactics, which are not democratic, not as per the norms of the international law, are also normalized as something which is normal. Okay, you can, if somebody wants to leave their home for some work or to see their relatives, they will be bolted out and they will be forced to stay in their home. as per the state's wishes, not their own wish. Newsham observes that the Chinese understand their target's vulnerabilities and capitalize on American avarice, ignorance, naive, okay, naivety, and vanity and hubris. Beijing, he says, attacks on a broad front, successfully manipulating American business and Wall Street, government officials, and the political class, academia, and even US military leaders. Fourth, the CCP does not simply direct the behavior of the willing. Fourth, the CCP does not simply direct the behavior of the willing, it conditions behavior. Important point to be noted. It conditions behavior. It will create incentives. It will create environment where you have to behave in a way the way they want you to behave, and you will do this unconsciously because your surroundings, the people, the perspective, the media, the environment is built in such a way that you have to behave the way the state wants, and you will think you are doing it on your own, but it's actually not. You are being directed to do this via this thing called conditioning. The conditions are laid out how you behave. Americans at the highest levels of government, business, and academia have proven surprisingly susceptible to PRC psychological manipulation. My experience with the US government, particularly the Department of State and Defense, provides useful example of this important slice of American social structure. The following anecdotes highlight some of the challenges the United States faces to turn its ship to turn its ship of state in the right direction to face the PRC political warfare challenge. Cumulatively, they helped cumulatively they helped propel me to write this book. In August 2017, Foreign Policy magazine ran what it must have considered to be a shocking expose, with part part of the headline declaring that Foggy Bottom Foggy Bottom has shown inexplicable defense to Beijing. The author urgently asserted that the US Department of State had begun tilting dangerously toward China, but only since January 2017. While the allegation of the department's tilt toward China is valid, the timeline provided offers a false narrative. For many years, key State Department officials seemed quite differential differential to the PRC, and to put it to put it charitably, inattentive to malign activities such as political warfare. How else can one explain why the acting US Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, Susan A. Thornton, a career Foreign Service officer, asserted in the late 2018 that she had never seen any evidence of PRC covert influence operations in the United States. Oddly enough, by the time that stunning statement was made, there was a flood of evidence available from the Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI) and Central Intelligence Agency (CIA) regarding the massive PRC campaign to influence US public opinion. It is not clear how Thornton, who was responsible for Washington's China policy, could have been inattentive to such compelling evidence, nor it is clear why she would repeatedly improperly block US block US law enforcement agencies in their efforts to deal with China's repeated violations of US sovereignty and law, as well as was alleged by senior NSC official, and is detailed in this book. Moreover, in December 2016, the American Charge d'Affaires at U.S. Embassy in Bangkok related related during a 75-minute discussion that Russian election interference posed the greatest threat to the United States, which was actually a kind of a propaganda, which later became known that it was there's nothing about it. There's nothing called Russian interference in U.S. election. While China's political warfare is not a threat, and that we Americans can handle it. His skewed threat assessment alone is deeply worrisome, but the story of why I was in his office in the first place is of equal concern. 2 months earlier, in October 2016, I was invited to the US Embassy in Bangkok by a US House of Representatives staff, for the US House of Representatives staff delegation to brief its members on PRC political warfare against Thailand. A professor at I was a professor at Thammasat University and the Royal Thai Military Academy at the time, and I had gained unique insights regarding PRC political warfare campaigns in the region during the previous 3 years. For 2 hours, I provided the staff, the staff delegation key element of what is written in chapter 5 and 6 of this book. 10 minutes into my presentation, the US Embassy Foreign Service officers escorting the staff delegation looked agitated. 25 minutes into the discussion, they neared hysteria and, in one case, became teary eyed. They frantically tried to cut me off and convince the delegation to leave. The delegation leader calmly shut down shut down their protest, and we completed a very fruitful 2 hour discussion. But why the hysteria and tears? A confidant in the embassy later told me that these young foreign service officers felt I was being too hard on China. Too hard on China. When I learned the astonishing reason for their inappropriate conduct, I asked to see the chargy affairs, hoping their view would be more enlightened than those of young staffers. After our 75-minute discussion, it was very clear they were not. In another instance, as a lecturer at the Foreign Service Institute in Arlington, Virginia, several years ago, I asked instructors teaching courses on public affairs about the curriculum they use to educate State Department public affairs officers about the PRC political warfare. I may as well I may as well have asked them to explain how they taught quantum mechanics or matter antimatter asymmetry, for they had no idea what I was talking about. These instructors were responsible for shaping the State Department's strategic communicators to help them compete and succeed on the perilous information battlefield, and yet they did not understand what the term political warfare meant. Okay, if you have any questions, to use hash ASK. I will take questions at the last 15 minutes. So I will finish in 11:45, and then we will read the book again. At numerous meetings and conferences I attended with senior US diplomats since 1995, I heard many sneeringly deride deride the Cold War mentality of those who expressed concern about the PRC's totalitarian governance, expansionist nature, or global political warfare. Though the PRC openly acknowledge that it is at war with the United States, there appears to be no more damning a personal denunciation in the foreign service community than to accuse someone exhibiting a Cold War mentality toward China. Savvy young foreign service officers take their cues from senior diplomats on how to succeed in the State Department's corporate culture. Those who learn quickly to withhold concerns about the PRC are generally promoted to more senior positions, the bureaucracy and its games and how it plays. The State Department has recently begun reversing decades of ignorance, apathy, and appeasement toward the PRC, but there is still much to repair. Unfortunately, and the same thing needs to happen also in our bureaucracy. But unfortunately, we do not have the wherewithal, the political leadership to actually do those changes, undo those changes which are required at this juncture to actually fight this war. The State Department has recently begun reversing decades of ignorance, apathy, and appeasement towards the PRC, but there is still much to repair. Unfortunately, the situation has not been any better on the side of the US Department of Defense, at least until rather recently. At defense education institutions such as National Defense University, Command and Staff Colleges, Command and Staff Colleges, and the Defense Information School, systematic education about the PRC's extensive global political warfare simply disappeared. In an experience similar to my visit to the Foreign Service Institute, I gave a guest lecture at the Defense Information School at Fort Meade, Maryland, vi- and, and visited with the school commandant in their office. I proposed that the school begin a program of instructions to prepare the Defense Department's strategic communicators to combat PRC propaganda, media warfare, and other forms of political warfare. The commandant smiled politely, but was clearly unfamiliar with political warfare as a topic. After asking me to better explain it, they informed me that they could not initiate such a program without being directed by a higher authority. Implied in their words and tone was that they were not going to ask for any such direction. With the Department of Defense, like the State Department, for many years, it was a likely career death sentence to speak truth about the nature of PRC threat. Wonder how it came about that if something exists which is an which is a threat to US, why the people who are supposed to defend the Defense Department and the State Department, why they're not speaking about it? How the bureaucrats have been conditioned to think like this, that if you're going to ask real pertinent existential threat to US, the propaganda, the warfare, and your careers are over. How this came about it is a very interesting thing. Speak truth about nature of PRC threat, whether it be political warfare, expansion into the South or East China Seas, or increasingly threatening People's Liberation Army (PLA). Senior officials set Senior officials set the tone as the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, General Raymond T. Raymond T. Odierno cheerily applauded the U.S. Army PLA camaraderie while visiting Beijing. He confidently proclaimed to America's astounded allies that he saw no evidence of a PLA threat to neighboring Japan. Similar to Thornton's perplexing declaration that she had seen no evidence of covert PRC influence operations in the United States despite ample public evidence to the contrary, there was then there was then a flood of evidence of PLA threats and preparations for military operations against Japan's southwest island. Perhaps the US Army's massive G2 intelligence staff could not find this evidence, but Google could. Comparably, the commander of U.S. Army Pacific, Lieutenant General Francis uh, Wyszynski, declared in 2013 that the Chinese army no longer posed a threat to the U.S. military, while a former vice chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff Admiral William A. Owen, who had business interests in China, lobbied Congress and the Pentagon on behalf of Beijing in 2012 to end U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. Meanwhile, highly respected U.S. senior intelligence officers who spoke up about the PRC threat were silenced. In one case, the U.S. Navy's most respected China expert, Captain James E. Fennell, gave two public unclassified speeches in 2013 and 2014 that exposed the PLA's expansionist activities in the South and East China Seas. Navy leadership approved these speeches in part because Fennell presented them as his personal assessment, but his assessments countered the position of US President Barack Hussein Obama's administration that the PRC was not a threat. Senior US government officials immediately denigrated denigrated the speeches, and eventually Fennell was fired. He was fired for doing his job, properly identifying a threat and analyzing what it means to US national security, and exhibiting the moral courage to speak the truth despite pressure to back down. It is no surprise that many Department of Defense education institutions downplayed the PRC threat for many years. One conversation I had with two then recent U.S. Army War College (AWC) graduates at a July 2019 conference is reflective of many similar talks. The officers told me that the Army War College is very soft on the China threat and that students don't learn anything about PRC. Political warfare, political warfare there. Moreover, the AWC academic journal parameters molds the thinking of future generals with highly lauded papers about countering propaganda and misinformation that failed to mention China even once. The snowball effect of this bias also comes as no surprise. It may explain why senior US Army officers who are presumably AWC graduates would 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 contract would contract the Rand Corporation to provide a 355-page study on modern political warfare in 2018 that intentionally avoided focus on PRC threat. Remarkably, the report actually states that Rand and the Army had the option to include PRC as a focus country for this 1 year study, but consciously chose to focus elsewhere. In Stealth War, Spalding describes how such willful acquaintances to the CCP's malign influence crosses many boundaries. On behalf of the NSC, Spalding sought to work with leading think tanks, non-government organizations, and law auditing and public relations firms that dealt with China in the United States and was eager to seek their help in exposing the Beijing government's influence, operations, and sanctioning of illegal behavior. Astonishingly, he was routinely rebuffed. Why? Spalding writes that some of the more forthright people said that assisting the NSC might anger their Chinese funders or business accounts. Chinese funders and business accounts. The list of organizations that refused to engage with me publicly in my official capacity was stunning. Top white shoe New York law firm organizations with mandates to promote democracy, freedom, and human rights would refuse to support my mission. Considering China is a dictatorship, people who are supposed to uphold democratic institutions, democratic policies, are refusing to work. Many of those institutions and elites were profiting of China, and they did not want to have those ties exposed. While working at a prestigious think tank in Hawaii, I witnessed firsthand much that Spalding described in Stealth War. Naive acquaintances, naive acquaintances in some cases, but all too often the corruption of values and willful blindness to PRC political warfare and espionage activities. I observed PRC successes in co-opting elected and government officials, businesses, academic institutions, non-government organizations, and civic organizations, among others. This highly successful PRC political warfare campaign continues to this day. These anecdotes reflect only a small part of the challenge the United States and democratic friends and allies face when confronting PRC political warfare. Much more essential information lies within this book. Still, more can be found in publications of the writers and organizations cited herein. It is my hope that this book stimulates readers' interest to seek out other references to expand their knowledge of PRC political warfare. This book will help readers understand the nature of PRC political warfare to build the capacity to deter, confront, and defeat this existential threat. We face a perilous future if we fail to challenge the PRC's totalitarian rule and its plans to divide and destroy our nation. If we fail to do so, our children and their children will pay the savage price for our egregious, egregious, uh, egregious negligence. Let's go. Okay. Acknowledgement. We'll skip this part. Don't have to read this. Selected abbreviations and acronyms. We'll do that later. Okay. Chapters are there. Chapter 1. But do we have time? Okay, we'll start reading this and we'll not be able to finish it, but let's start reading anyway. Chapter 1. An introduction to PRC political warfare. Let me see the comments. Yes, 120%. Correct. I wonder what they think even today. Okay, we'll just start reading little bit and then we will take question or some comments. It's very interesting. An introduction to PRC political warfare. So this is uh, great victory at Nilwan Hill, 1975. This painting depicts the Chinese perspective of the May 1841 Battle of Sanyulini, a skirmish that led to Anglo-Chinese information war that Cantonese scholars won. The People's Republic of China is at war. The People's Republic of China (PRC) is at war with the world. It is a war fought mostly for control and influence using coercion, corruption, violent, covert operations. The PRC prefers to win this war by never having to fire a shot, but its increasingly powerful military and paramilitary forces loom ominously in the background in support of its expanding war of influence. To the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party, this war is meant to rejuvenate China to its former imperial grandeur as the Middle Kingdom, center of the world. The philosophy of China. China is the center of the world. To once again be to once again be everything under the sun, the all-powerful hegemon power. It is a war to ensure the CCP's total control over China's population and resources, as well as those of foreign nations that the Chinese have historically called barbarian states. The Mongols who attacked the Chinese wall was built. The famous Chinese wall was built to actually prevent these barbarians from attacking the Chinese civilization state, both nearby and throughout the world. Much like the emperors, much like the emperors of the Celestial Empire at its peak, the CCP classifies these barbarian nations as either tributary states that re- that recognize the PRC's hegemony or potential enemies. So, to the CCP, to the Chinese Communist Party, there are only two states, two kinds of states can exist. One which and submits its sovereignty to Chinese and accepts China as a hegemon, and other as enemies. So there are no friends. There are no friends. There are no partners when it comes to Chinese statecraft. Despite the lofty pretext of peaceful national rejuvenation reflected in PRC's in PRC President Xi Jinping's China dream, the CCP has no desire for equality among nations. Rather, it seeks to impose its all-encompassing civilization on other lesser states. The ideological foundation of Xi's China dream is ultimately totalitarian, Leninist, and based on Marxist principles. For the CCP, just to digress, when China joined World Trade Organization and when China opened up its markets to outside companies, to outside nations, where they can sell, where China used its population as a market to actually open up and gain more influence, gain more market access. It was a kind of a thought that within 20-25 years, when China opened up, where Chinese people will go out and do business, other people will come and live in China, they will work in China, they will do business in China. So eventually, the Chinese state and the Chinese people, Chinese state specifically, not the people, Chinese state would actually adopt democracy as a means of governance. So, so the US or the Western nations thought that they would co-opt China to become democracy, but the other thing happened. Okay. So that's an interesting context. The ideological foundations of Xi's China dream is ultimately totalitarian and Leninist and based on Marxist principles. For the CCP, this is a total war for regional and global supremacy, and it incorporates elements of military, economic, informational, and political warfare. PRC political warfare, especially, is both offensive and defensive in nature. So people would have heard, okay, wolf warrior diplomacy. So you can search on Google wolf warrior diplomacy China, and you will find some interesting content on this. So it's offensive and defensive in nature, taking the form of unrestricted warfare and being conducted on a international scale. As a prelude to this study, it is crucial to establish the answer to several key questions. Why does it matter that the PRC seeks regional and ultimately global hegemony? Question number one: why would the world not accept and tolerate a rising China? Question number two: a seemingly non-threatening term so often used by PRC propaganda outlets and foreign advocates. Why should the world be concerned about China's long-term strategy to replace the United States as a global superpower? What is there? What is there to fear about China's peaceful rise and the CCP's goal of a Chinese-led world order? The answer is simple and stark. The PRC is a coercive, expansionist, hyper nationalistic, militarily powerful, and brutally repressive, fascist, and totalitarian state. According to retired U.S. Navy Captain James E. Fennell, the world has seen what happens when expansionist expansionist totalitarian regimes such as the PRC are left unchallenged and unchecked. In the world, in the world of this type of hegemony, people are subjects, simply property of the state, and the ideals such as democracy, democracy, inalienable rights, limited government, and rule of law have no place. It is useful. It is useful here to establish a foundation regarding some general general characteristics of totalitarian of characteristics of totalitarianism, such as identification of individuals as merely subjects of the state, control of media outlets, economic sectors, and educational institutions, control by a single political party with a separate chain of command alongside that of government of the government. So in China also, correct, the Chinese government and Chinese Communist Party. So Chinese CCP is a different entity, and government is run by a party. So there is a subtle difference that we need to understand, that the government of India is not any political party. Government of India or government of United States is its own entity. A party wins an election, they come and they represent government of India. But in China, there is a subtle difference. The CCP as a party which controls the government machinery, institutions, military. The Chinese government is equal to party. That is not the case with democracies in other countries. We need to remember that the difference. There is no difference between CCP and Chinese government. A lack of checks and balances, personality cults, and militarism, and a historical narrative of humiliation leading to hyper nationalism. So let's talk about this important narrative of humiliation. So China was colonized by Japan, by British, and it is called a century of humiliation in the Chinese history, in the Chinese psyche. And this is used as a narrative to actually create hyper nationalism among the Chinese, leading to hyper nationalism and entitlement to aggression. So this century of humiliation and use of this narrative to actually inculcate the propaganda that because we were colonized for a century, now we have a right to go and colonize other people and states because we were colonized. Hyper nationalism and an entitlement to aggression. These defining characteristics were witnessed by the world during the 20th century in countries such as in countries such as Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union, Adolf Hitler's Germany, Benito Mussolini's Italy, Imperial Japan, and Pol Pot's Cambodia. Such political structures and narratives established a framework of governance for empires and dictatorships like the PRC. Long before the founding of the CCP, there is nothing new or inherently Chinese about totalitarian fascism. The danger of contemporary totalitarian Sino-fascism, interesting term, this views, however, is unprecedented. The power of modern technology and the PRC convergence of convergence of massive political, military, and economic power position it to be, according to Canada's prestigious Fraser Institute, World Freedom's greatest threat. PRC has become a hegemon bent on controlling the world's resources, ostensibly to benefit China, or in reality, to benefit the approximately 90 million out of 1.4 billion Chinese who are CCP members. As merely one indicator of the PRC's wealth disparity, a 2016 Peking University study found that the richest 1% of households held a third of country's wealth, while the poorest 25% owned only 1% of its wealth. The CCP has proven that it can effectively leverage the openness of democratic systems to achieve hegemony over those democracies. Democracies are very, very vulnerable to these dictatorial regimes who use the freedoms and systems to actually infiltrate, inculcate, and create a support base for its own dictatorial regimes and policies. It prefers to do this peacefully, if possible, not entirely without a struggle, but ideally without kinetic combat. Kinetic combat means active warfare. But the PRC has continually indicated that it is now strong and confident enough to fight a war to achieve that hegemony, even if it must pay a very large price. As the PRC builds a navy that will roughly twice the size of US Navy by 2030 and adds hypersonic missiles to its triad nuclear strike capability that now covers the entire US mainland. Beijing defies Beijing defies international law and relies on corruption and coercion to achieve its diplomatic, economic, and military aims. According to Eli Ratner at the Council of Foreign Relations, the PRC strategies include fracturing and capturing fracturing and capturing regional institutions that could otherwise raise collective concerns about China's behavior, and intimidating countries in maritime Asia that seek to lawfully extract resources and defend their sovereignty. PRC's political warfare apparatus is a key weapon in its quest for a regional and global hegemony. Brutal internal repression is one well documented form of its unique brand of political warfare. The PRC is criticized today by organizations such as Amnesty International and governments, including that of United States for imprisoning at least a million ethnic Uyghurs in re-education camps under particularly cruel circumstances. In fact, the repression of Uyghurs and other Muslim sects is part of a much more insidious trend, according to the Washington Post. China's systematic anti-Muslim campaign and accompanying repression of Christians and Tibetan Buddhists may represent the large-scale official attack on religious freedom in the world. However, the PRC's internal political repression involves a brutally much more lethal than religious suppression and a thought. It's lethal than religious suppression and thought control. The CCP is responsible for the deaths of millions of Chinese during disastrous large-scale reign of terror, such as the Great Leap Forward, the Great Leap Forward 1958 to 62, the Cultural Revolution 1966-76, and smaller atrocities such as 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. Hong Kong-based historian Frank Dichter has confirmed, based on findings in the PRC's archive, that during the Great Leap Forward alone, systematic torture, brutality, starvation, killing of Chinese peasants was the norm. More than 45 million people were worked, starved, or beaten to death in China during those 4 years, while the Cultural Revolution resulted in the murder of at least 2 million more. Another one or 2 million were killed in other campaigns, such as land reform and anti-rightist movements in 1950s. This murders, this murderous repression also includes plausible report that the PRC currently executes Falun Gong practitioners and other prisoners of conscience on a mass scale in order to harvest organs that can be monetized for substantial profits by CCP officials. Estimates of those killed directly or indirectly through CCP political warfare against the people of China are strongly debated, but during Mao Zedong's reign alone, they range as high as 70 million. Okay, it's a long chapter, so we will stop here. We'll start from chapter number 32 in our next reading, and let's let's take some comments and any questions are there. Okay. Okay. Okay, Vietnam. Okay, this is interesting. Vietnam is equal to Afghanistan in wars, graveyard. No. Oh, that's a very interesting question. Okay, very interesting question. So Vietnam Vietnam people are very proud people, and they are actually warriors. So when Chinese attacked, okay, and Vietnam people were actually fought and defeated Chinese, and also they also defeated the Americans. But Vietnam people are not they are not into perpetual war. So when the Americans left Vietnam, the Vietnamese left their weapons and built factories, and now they are of a growing economy. So you cannot compare Vietnam and Afghanistan. The uh, the geography, the demography of Afghanistan, its people, its culture is very different. Not really, not really. So war is something which is very new to Vietnam. So we have seen the Chinese invaded. We have also seen some in ancient times there were Vietnamese people who actually invaded Cambodia and also Thailand, the Champa Kingdom. But in general, it is not like that. The war is not something there. The Afghan people are in war continuously for millennia even. Okay, they're fighting like this. But Vietnamese are not like that. But yes, they are a proud warriors. If somebody comes to fight them, they will fight. But they are not going to be in fighting mode, in war mode, till perpetual eternity. They will finish and they will do the other work. Boshali is saying not really. Vietnam had a lot of support from Soviet and China. But correct, Boshali, Vietnam also fought Chinese as well when China actually invaded Vietnam. And I think the Chinese military had their worst defeat at the hands of Vietnamese people. So there is a bad blood between China and Vietnam in that regard. So the China considers Japan as its mortal enemy because of the subjugation of the Chinese people. Same way, because China had invaded Vietnam and Vietnam defeated the Chinese military decisively, and they had to flee. So there is a kind of a bad things happening. Bad things are there between those two countries. I wonder who was supporting Afghanistan against the USA. I think US was not fighting a serious war or training programs. It was clearly there are many books written on this, especially this aspect that who was supporting Taliban during the US was in Afghanistan. The answer is very complex. whatever is known in terms of leaks and other books and papers written is that Pakistan wanted to Pakistan as a primary player in that region wanted to keep Afghanistan as its strategic asset. Okay, and to get that, it did not want US to completely destroy and have full influence. So it was partly Pakistan which actually funded and helped Afghanistan, and there may have been also other countries covertly helping Taliban, but the primary people who are helping were actually Pakistanis, the ISI specifically, and it's well documented. Yes, yeah, that's absolutely right. Yes, Abhay, you are absolutely correct. Bhusharati, you are absolutely bang on, and this is goes on for a long time. Ah, that's interesting. Unlike Indians, Chinese origin lobbyists don't run for elections and remain invisible and push agenda for China. That's really interesting. Good point, Bhusharati. Apparently, okay, well, that's a very interesting comment. Vaishali says that the relationship started in 1970s with that Henry Kissinger, apparently to keep China and USSR apart from each other. But then the capitalism profit model took over with China's cheap labor. Vaishali, the meeting was actually facilitated by Pakistan. Uh, and Pakistan played a very important role in creating forming relations between the USA and China. Okay, when is the book written? Okay, interesting. Let me see. The book is written 2009. No, not 2000. That is his date. Uh, I need to check exactly the when the book is written because IBN is here. Let me see. Okay, 2020 it mentions here. So, but I need to check this part. Okay, here's the IBN number. Now we will get to know. 2020. So this book is written in 2020. So this is your answer. Hmm. Boishali Dee has done a lot of study. China optimizes its balance between Marxism, Leninism to control the population and its traditional Confucian administrative system and capitalism and political expansionism for its benefit only. Uh, yes, it's understood, but if you and that see, Bhushaliti, you are correct in many ways, but we have to see that if China was actually moving towards because even the general Chinese society is liberal in nature. Confucianism and other local regional practices, they are actually not that bad. But we have seen that when Xi Jinping came into power, there has been slide in terms of the freedoms which were enjoyed by Chinese people prior to Xi Jinping coming in, and there has been a brutal suppression of power suppression of the common people, of businesses, politics, of individuals who are opposed to the CCP, especially the business people who have been suppressed, who have been coerced into aligning with CCP. And there is an underlying, like if you go and read the paper, you will understand that there is a kind of like there's a thought process where China wants to be capitalist, to gain capital, and then when it suits, it will go back to communism once it has enough money and wealth to redistribute among its people. So the state policy of China is communism, and that is reflected in its policies in so many ways. So it is not that it will utilize its other ways to actually other cultures, other policies, the Confucianism, and other traditional beliefs to actually gain control or become better society. But it has not happened. The society has gone from bad to worse, and its policies have gone bad to worse. So we have not seen this become a reality. If it had become, it would be a very good thing. But unfortunately, it did not. Oh, that's interesting. I worked in petrochemicals and have interacted with their companies. They have violated every single intellectual property right over plant design and catalyst design. Obvious even in the early 2000s. Absolutely. Okay, very good conversation. I think Boshalidi has shared a lot of insights which people will love it. Okay, and we will continue this reading in this time only, 10:30 or maybe little bit early, 10:15 we will do this. But 10:30 or a little bit earlier we'll do this. So it's a very interesting reading indeed. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining. There are a lot of people have joined today in this midnight. Thank you, people. You can get this book. Just type the. I will put the book's link as well in the link, so you can download the book, read it for yourself. It's free of cost, available. Nothing would be there for you, no copyright. And thank you for joining again. And we'll see you tomorrow on our next reading session. धन्यवाद. जय श्री राम. वंदे मातरम.